Betrayal tastes like ash, especially when it comes from the soul destined by the moon goddess. When the man meant to cherish her forever, tossed her aside for a dowry of gold and land, a broken, ordinary wolf made a desperate choice, marrying a scarred, nameless stranger. Her revenge was about to rewrite history. The grand hall of the Sterling estate was suffocatingly warm, filled with the scent of roasted meats, spiced wine, and the cloying perfumes of the northern nobility. It was the eve of the winter solstice, the traditional night when the moon goddess revealed true mates to those who had come of age. For Genevieve, a humble healer of the Silver Creek pack, this night was supposed to be the culmination of a lifelong dream. She had known for 3 years that Caleb, the pack's future beta and the man she had loved since childhood, was her fated mate. They had kept it a quiet secret, waiting for this very night to announce their union to Lord Montgomery and the rest of the pack. Genevieve stood near the roaring hearth, smoothing down the front of her simple, homespun woolen gown. She didn't possess the silk or jewels of the high-born ladies, but she had a promise, or so she thought. A sudden hush fell over the great hall as the heavy oak doors swung open. Caleb entered, but he was not alone. Genevieve's breath hitched in her throat. Clinging to Caleb's arm was Lady Victoria of the wealthy Ironclaw pack. Victoria was draped in crimson velvet, a heavy necklace of genuine sapphires resting against her collarbone sapphires that belonged to Caleb's late mother, a family heirloom Genevieve had once been told would be hers. "Quiet, everyone," Caleb announced, his voice carrying the commanding resonance of an alpha in training. He didn't look toward the hearth. He didn't look at Genevieve. "Tonight, the goddess has blessed our pack with a union of great prosperity. I am honored to announce that Lady Victoria and I have found the mating bond within each other. By the next full moon, she will be your new Luna, bringing with her the alliance of Duke Reginald's vast armies and a dowry of 50 acres of silver-veined land." The applause was deafening. It rang in Genevieve's ears like the shattering of glass, the mating bond within her chest, a tether of spiritual energy that had gently hummed for years, violently snapped. The physical pain was excruciating, like a hot iron driven directly through her ribs. She collapsed to her knees, clutching her chest, gasping for air as the true gravity of Caleb's lie settled in. He hadn't found the bond in Victoria. He was rejecting his true mate for wealth and political power. Under the harsh pack law of 1452, a law strictly enforced by the Montgomery family, a fated mate rejection was a scandal of the highest order. But Caleb was the future beta, and Genevieve was an orphan with nothing to her name but a basket of medicinal herbs. The pack's hierarchy would always protect the powerful. "Genevieve?" A mocking voice floated above her. She looked up through tear-blurred eyes to see Victoria standing over her, a cruel, triumphant smile playing on her painted lips. Caleb stood a step behind his new fiancée, his expression hardened into a mask of cold indifference. "I see the winter chill has made you clumsy, little healer," Victoria purred, loud enough for the gossiping nobles nearby to hear. "Or perhaps you are just overwhelmed by our good news. Caleb told me of your pathetic infatuation with him. A shame. But a future beta requires a Luna of noble blood, not a peasant who smells of dirt and dried sage." Genevieve looked at Caleb, silently pleading with him to say something, to defend the years of whispered promises they had shared by the riverbank. "Stand up, Genevieve," Caleb said coldly, his voice devoid of the warmth she had known. "You are making a scene. And under the decree of Lord Montgomery, an unmated female of 21 years whose fated bond has been severed must either leave the territory by the next moon or be placed into servitude to pay for her keep. I suggest you start packing your herbs." The betrayal was an absolute, crushing weight. He wasn't just leaving her, he was condemning her to exile or slavery. The surrounding wolves murmured in agreement, their eyes filled with pity and disdain. Genevieve forced herself to stand, her legs trembling but her jaw set. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. The naive, hopeful girl who had walked into the hall died right there on the cobblestone floor. "I accept your rejection, Caleb of the Silver Creek pack," Genevieve whispered, the ancient, formal words tearing the last agonizing threads of their bond from her soul. "May the goddess judge your greed." Turning her back on the whispering crowd, Genevieve walked out of the Sterling estate and into the freezing, unforgiving night. She had 3 days until the full moon, 3 days to find a husband, or she would be stripped of her freedom forever. The howling valley was merciless in December. Snow fell in thick, blinding sheets as Genevieve trudged through the mud-churned streets of the lower village. The tavern, known as the Boar and Barrel, was the only place still glowing with candlelight. It was a haven for drifters, rogue mercenaries, and those rejected by highborn society. Desperation had driven Genevieve here. She could not survive the winter in the wild as a rogue, nor would she ever submit to scrubbing the floors of Caleb and Victoria's future manor. She needed a mate, anyone, a marriage of convenience to satisfy the pack's archaic laws. Genevieve pushed through the heavy wooden door, coughing as a cloud of pipe smoke hit her face. The tavern was rowdy, filled with drunken laughter and the clinking of cheap tin mugs. She scanned the room, her heart pounding against her ribs. Most of the men here were drunkards or known criminals. Then she saw him. Sitting in the darkest corner of the tavern, far removed from the fire, was a stranger. He wore a heavy, weather-beaten leather cloak, its hood pulled low. Even sitting down, it was obvious the man was massive, broad-shouldered, and thick-chested, radiating an aura of quiet, lethal stillness that kept the other patrons at a wide berth. A jagged silver scar slashed down the right side of his jaw, disappearing into the collar of his tunic. He was nursing a tankard of ale, his gaze fixed on the table. Genevieve swallowed her fear. She had nothing left to lose. She marched over to his table and slammed her small, frost-bitten hands down on the sticky wood. "I need a husband." The stranger didn't flinch. Slowly, he raised his head. Genevieve's breath caught. Under the hood, his eyes were a piercing, turbulent amber, framed by dark, unruly hair. His face was rugged, hardened by battle and weather, but strikingly handsome in a brutal, untamed way. "You're standing in my light, little wolf," he said. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble that sent a strange, involuntary shiver down her spine. It didn't sound like the voice of a beggar or a wandering rogue. It sounded like rolling thunder. "My name is Genevieve," she said, lifting her chin, refusing to be intimidated. "I have a small cottage at the edge of the woods and a steady trade as a healer. I need a bonded mate by tomorrow evening to avoid the servitude decrees of the Silver Creek Pack. I am asking you to marry me." A slow, dark amusement flickered in the stranger's amber eyes. "You walk into a tavern full of cutthroats and propose to the first man sitting in the shadows? You are either incredibly brave, Genevieve, or incredibly foolish." "I am desperate," she corrected, her voice breaking just a fraction. "I don't care about your past. I don't care if you're a rogue. You get a warm roof over your head and free meals. I get my freedom. We sign the registry, we bear the mate mark of convenience, and we stay out of each other's way. Do we have a deal?" The man studied her for a long, agonizing moment. His gaze drifted down to her chest, right where her spiritual bond had been violently severed. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if he could see the invisible, bleeding wound left by Caleb's rejection. "A roof and meals," the stranger mused, taking a slow sip of his ale. "Very well. I accept your proposal, Genevieve. You may call me Dominic." The next morning, the village square was bustling with preparations for Caleb and Victoria's lavish mating ceremony. Carts of imported white roses and silk banners choked the streets. Ignoring the sneers and pointing fingers of her former friends, Genevieve stood before Father Gregory, the village elder, in the damp, freezing courtyard of the local shrine. Beside her stood Dominic. In the daylight, he looked even more imposing. He wore the same battered cloak, but he stood with a spine of steel, his posture commanding a bizarre amount of respect from the nervous priest. "Do you, Genevieve, take this rogue, Dominic, to be your bound mate?" Father Gregory asked. His nose wrinkled in blatant distaste. "I do," Genevieve said firmly. "And do you, Dominic, vow to protect and provide for this female?" "I do," Dominic replied, his deep voice carrying easily over the howling winter wind. They clasped hands. Genevieve gasped softly. Dominic's hands were calloused and rough, but the moment his skin touched hers, a bizarre, searing heat rushed up her arm. It wasn't the gentle hum of a fated bond. It was something wilder, ancient, and terrifyingly powerful. Dominic's amber eyes flashed for a fraction of a second, catching the winter sunlight. Before the binding was even fully complete, a mocking laugh echoed across the courtyard. Caleb, dressed in a pristine white uniform adorned with gold medals, walked toward them, Victoria hanging off his arm. "Well, well," Caleb sneered, looking Dominic up and down with absolute disgust. I see you found your level, Genevieve. A nameless, filthy stray. I suppose trash naturally attracts trash. Genevieve felt a spike of humiliation, but before she could speak, Dominic moved. It was a subtle shift, just a stepping forward, but the sheer predatory menace rolling off him caused Caleb to instinctively take a step back, his hand dropping to the hilt of his ceremonial sword. A wise man, Dominic said softly, his tone dangerously calm, does not insult another man's mate, especially when he lacks the strength to back up his arrogance. Caleb's face flushed bright red. You dare speak to me, rogue? I am the future beta of this pack. Beta, Dominic repeated, tasting the word as if it were a foul joke. A title given, not earned. Walk away, boy, before you ruin your own wedding day. Victoria scoffed, pulling Caleb away. Leave them, Caleb. They aren't worth the mud on your boots. As they walked away, Caleb shot a furious glare over his shoulder, clearly unused to being spoken to with such blatant disrespect. Genevieve exhaled a shaky breath, turning to her new husband. You shouldn't have done that. Caleb is dangerous. He commands the pack's guard. Dominic looked down at her, a strange, terrifying calm on his scarred face. I have fought wars, Genevieve. A spoiled pup in a fancy uniform does not frighten me. Let us go to this cottage of yours. The journey to the edge of the woods was silent. The snow had deepened, making the trek treacherous. They were halfway through the whispering woods, miles from the safety of the village patrols, when the hair on Genevieve's arms stood up. The distinct scent of rotting pine and dried blood hit her nose. Rogues, she whispered, freezing in her tracks. From the tree line, 5 massive, unkempt wolves emerged, their teeth bared, saliva dripping from their muzzles. They were starved and desperate, driven mad by the harsh winter. Genevieve backed away, reaching for the small silver dagger in her boot. 5 against 2 were impossible odds. Get behind me, Dominic ordered. He didn't sound panicked. He sounded annoyed. Dominic, we have to run, Genevieve cried, but her husband was already stepping forward, removing his heavy leather cloak and tossing it onto the snow. The largest rogue lunged. What happened next defied everything Genevieve knew about the world. Dominic didn't just shift. The transformation was instantaneous, explosive, and violent. Where the scarred man had stood, a monstrous beast now crouched. Genevieve fell to the snow in shock. Dominic's wolf was twice the size of a normal lycanthrope. His fur was pitch black, consuming the light around him, and he radiated a suffocating aura of absolute dominance that forced Genevieve's own wolf to whimper in submission. But it wasn't his size that made her blood run cold. As the massive black wolf tore through the rogues, snapping necks and crushing bone with terrifying, effortless brutality, he turned his massive head toward her. His eyes were no longer amber. They were glowing a brilliant, luminescent crimson red. Genevieve stopped breathing. Every pup in the Northern Territories grew up hearing the legends. There was only one bloodline in the entire world that possessed the crimson eyes of an alpha king, the royal bloodline of the Obsidian Court. A bloodline led by a king who had supposedly vanished into the northern wastes 3 years ago. The black wolf shook the blood from his muzzle, stepping over the broken bodies of the rogues, and fixed his glowing crimson stare on his new, terrified wife. Genevieve realized with a jolt of sheer terror that she hadn't just married a rogue to spite her ex-mate. She had just bound her soul to the Lycan King. Wind howled through the whispering woods, carrying the metallic scent of fresh blood. The massive black beast stood motionless amidst the carnage, the crimson glow of his eyes pinning Genevieve to the frozen earth. Her mind raced, desperately piecing together the terrifying reality of her situation. The Lycan King, the supreme ruler of all werewolf kind, a monarch whose power was absolute and whose true name had been lost to 3 years of wild rumors and dark legends. He stepped toward her. Genevieve scrambled backward, her hands scraping against the icy crust of the snow. In a blur of motion and shifting shadows, the monstrous wolf dissolved. Dominic stood before her once again, breathing heavily, his scarred chest bare to the freezing wind. The terrifying crimson light had faded from his eyes, replaced by the familiar, turbulent amber, but the undeniable aura of a royal alpha still rolled off him in suffocating waves. He picked up his discarded leather cloak and draped it over Genevieve's trembling shoulders. "Do not fear me, little wolf," Dominic commanded softly, his rough hand lingering on her cheek. "My wrath is reserved for those who seek to harm what is mine." And by the laws of the goddess and the vows of Father Gregory, you are mine. You are the king, Genevieve stammered, her voice barely a whisper. King Dominic of the Obsidian Court. But the realm believes you perished in the northern wastes. They say your brother, Maximilian, is preparing to take the throne. Dominic's jaw tightened, the jagged scar stretching taut. Maximilian is a traitor. 3 years ago, my own council, led by Lord Reginald Carmichael, ambushed my royal carriage. They poisoned my wine with liquid silver and wolfsbane, effectively trapping my beast and erasing my memories. I wandered the lower villages as a nameless rogue, surviving on scraps and raw instinct. He looked down at his hands, watching the last of the rogue blood drip from his knuckles. It was the mating vow, Genevieve. The moment our souls bound before the priest, the ancient magic of the goddess shattered the block on my mind. Your willingness to bind yourself to a broken man gave me my kingdom back. Genevieve was stunned. Lord Reginald Carmichael was Victoria's father. The same family that Caleb had just aligned himself with was responsible for the attempted murder of the Lichen King. The betrayal ran deeper than a simple broken heart. It was high treason. Dominic helped her to her feet, his touch surprisingly gentle for a man who had just slaughtered 5 wolves with his bare hands. Take me to your cottage. We have much to discuss, and the Silver Creek Pack is about to experience a very abrupt change in leadership. The next 2 days passed in a tense, surreal haze. Genevieve's small cottage, usually filled with the quiet scent of drying lavender and chamomile, now felt electric. Dominic did not act like a rogue, nor did he act like a tyrant. He helped her chop wood, listened to her explain her herbal remedies, and slept on a pallet near the hearth, fiercely guarding the door. Yet, the pain in Genevieve's chest from Caleb's severed bond still flared with agonizing intensity. On the second night, as she gasped in pain and clutched her heart, Dominic knelt beside her. He didn't ask for permission. He simply pulled her into his broad chest, wrapping his arms around her. Let it go, Dominic rumbled against her ear. The bond you felt with that boy was a false echo, a childhood attachment that your mind mistook for destiny. How do you know? She cried, tears of lingering betrayal spilling down her cheeks. Because a true fated bond does not snap, Dominic replied, his amber eyes holding her gaze fiercely. And because my beast has been howling for you since the moment you slammed your hands on my tavern table. He pressed his lips to her forehead. The moment he did, a rush of pure golden warmth flooded Genevieve's veins. The sharp, jagged pain in her chest evaporated, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that tied her soul directly to the man holding her. The realization hit her with the force of a falling anvil. Dominic wasn't just a marriage of convenience. The moon goddess had designed this entire, torturous path to bring her to her true mate. Their quiet revelation was shattered the following morning by the sound of heavy boots marching up the gravel path. Genevieve peered through the frosted window. 3 of the Silver Creek elite guards stood in her garden, their silver-tipped spears glinting in the pale sun. Leading them was Captain Harrison, a notoriously cruel enforcer loyal to Caleb. In his hand he held a rolled parchment bearing the official wax seal of the Pack Alpha. Dominic stepped up behind her, his chest brushing her back. "Stay here," he murmured, his voice dropping into that lethal, gravelly register. Dominic opened the heavy oak door and stepped onto the porch. Captain Harrison sneered, unrolling the parchment. By decree of the future Beta Caleb and Lord Montgomery, Harrison read loudly, "This land and the dwelling upon it are hereby seized. The territory is to be leveled to expand the private botanical gardens of Lady Victoria Carmichael. The occupants have 1 hour to vacate, or they will be arrested for trespassing on noble property." Genevieve's heart sank. This was Caleb's petty, vindictive revenge. He couldn't stand the fact that she had found a loophole in the law, so he was taking her home. "You have no authority here," Dominic stated, leaning against the doorframe with infuriating calm. "Listen to me, you filthy stray," Harrison barked, stepping forward. "You might have tricked this peasant girl into marriage, but you are nothing in the Silver Creek Pack. Move aside, or I will run you through." Dominic's laughter was a dark, terrifying sound that caused the other 2 guards to nervously shift their weight. "Tell your future Beta that we will attend his grand ceremony tonight. We will deliver the deed to this land personally." Harrison scoffed. "You? At the grand banquet? The guards will slaughter you at the gates." "We shall see," Dominic replied, his eyes flashing a momentary, brilliant crimson. Now get off my wife's land before I tear your arms from your sockets and beat you to death with them." The sheer predatory malice in Dominic's voice worked. Harrison swallowed hard, his bravado faltering. He signaled his men, and they hastily retreated down the path. Dominic turned back to Genevieve, a dangerous, beautiful smile curving his lips. "Wear your finest dress, my queen. Tonight, we reclaim our kingdom." The Sterling estate was illuminated by 1,000 floating lanterns, casting a golden glow over the snow-covered courtyards. The grand banquet hall was a sea of opulent velvet, glittering jewels, and intoxicated laughter. The entire northern province had gathered to witness Caleb's anointment as Beta and his official mating to Victoria of House Carmichael. At the head table sat Lord Montgomery, flanked by Victoria's father, Lord Reginald Carmichael, who wore the smug expression of a man who had successfully bought a pack. Genevieve walked through the towering oak doors, her hands securely resting in Dominic's. She wore her best dress, a simple, deep blue velvet gown she had sewn herself. Compared to the diamonds and silks surrounding them, she looked plain, but with Dominic at her side she felt entirely invincible. Dominic wore his battered leather cloak, completely unbothered by the horrified stares and disgusted whispers of the nobility. "Look who decided to show her face," Victoria's shrill voice echoed across the room. The music abruptly stopped. The crowd parted, revealing Caleb and Victoria standing near the ceremonial altar. Victoria was dripping in the heirloom sapphires that Caleb had promised to Genevieve. Caleb's face twisted into an ugly snarl. "I thought my guards told you to vacate the territory, rogue. Have you come to beg for a position in my stables?" "We came to deliver our response to your eviction notice," Dominic said, his voice projecting effortlessly to the farthest corners of the silent hall. Lord Montgomery slammed his silver goblet onto the table. "Guards! Seize this insolent stray and the girl. Throw them in the dungeons." A dozen elite guards drew their swords, rushing toward the couple. But before a single blade could be swung, the massive stained glass windows at the front of the hall shattered inward. The entire room screamed as a dozen massive, heavily armored wolves leapt through the broken glass, landing with earth-shaking thuds on the marble floor. They were not ordinary pack wolves. They wore the blackened steel armor of the Obsidian Royal Guard, the elite killers of the Lichen King. The pack guards instantly dropped their swords, falling to their knees in terror. Lord Reginald Carmichael's face drained of all color. From the center of the armored beasts, a heavily scarred man stepped forward. It was Commander Bennett, the most feared warrior in the realm, wearing the golden insignia of the King's commander. He marched straight down the center aisle, ignoring Lord Montgomery's pathetic attempts to grovel. The crowd scrambled out of his way as he stopped directly in front of Dominic. Without a word, the terrifying commander dropped to one knee, drawing his massive broadsword and laying it flat on the marble floor. "My king," Bennett said, his voice thick with emotion. "We received the distress pulse from your Alpha Aura 2 days ago. The usurper Maximilian has been captured. The capital is secured. We await your orders." The collective gasp of 100 nobles sucked the air from the room. Caleb's knees buckled, his eyes bulging as he stared at the nameless stranger he had insulted. Victoria let out a pathetic whimper. Dominic stepped forward, letting his leather cloak slip from his shoulders. He unleashed the full, suffocating weight of his Alpha King aura. The air grew instantly heavy, forcing wolves of every rank, alphas, betas, and omegas alike, to their hands and knees. Only Genevieve remained standing, protected by the golden warmth of their mate bond. "Lord Reginald Carmichael," Dominic roared, his voice the sound of an apex predator. Carmichael wept on the floor. "Mercy, my king, I was forced." "You poisoned your rightful sovereign for a promise of power," Dominic stated coldly. "Commander Bennett, arrest Lord Carmichael for high treason. He will face the executioner's block at dawn." 2 royal guards dragged the screaming Lord Carmichael from the hall. Victoria collapsed, sobbing hysterically as her wealth and family were destroyed in seconds. Dominic turned his glowing crimson eyes to Caleb. "You abused your power. You cast aside an innocent female, and you dared to threaten my queen." "I didn't know," Caleb sobbed, utterly broken. "Please, your majesty. She was always mine," Dominic snarled. "You are stripped of your rank and lands. You are permanently exiled to the northern wastes." Dominic turned his back on the disgraced wolves and walked back to Genevieve. The murderous king vanished, and the man who loved her returned. Kneeling before her, he took her hands. Genevieve, Dominic said, his amber eyes shining. You offered me a home when I had forgotten my own. Will you sit by my side as the true Luna of all lichens? Genevieve looked at the shattered remains of the people who had tried to break her, and finally, at the magnificent man who loved her. I will, she smiled, pulling him into a passionate kiss as the royal guard howled in victory. Did Genevieve's ultimate revenge against her arrogant ex-mate satisfy your craving for drama and justice? If you loved this tale of a broken healer rising to become the most powerful Lichen Queen in history, don't keep it a secret. Smash that like button, share this epic fantasy romance with your friends, and hit subscribe for more thrilling, twist-filled werewolf stories every single week. Your support keeps the magic alive.